me all your tools. This is a heat gun, not a hair dryer. Don't use a hair dryer, it's not hot enough. This one shows you all the temperatures. Harbor Freight, of course. I think it was like 25 bucks or something like that. Anyway, there's two ways you can warm up your pitch. One is to use a heat gun, and the other is to use a brushy flame on your torch. And what we're going to do now is we're going to heat up the pitch. Wear safety goggles. You don't want this stuff in your eyes. It's also very clingy and burny. So if you're going to have to touch it, which sometimes you do, like you have to push it over a little bit, get your hands wet. Some pitches though stick even though they're wet. So, you know, do it at your own risk there. It's hot stuff, and it's like they used to throw it off of castles on top of people to kill them. So, you know, take that into consideration. Don't be fearful, be safe. Hair up and wear not a nice apron, something that you don't care about, because this just get thrashed and your fingernails look like hell, but it's such fun. So I'm going to warm this up, and I'm going to start with the heat gun, but I'm going to switch the torch. And this is too low, but where do I have this at? Oh, I put it about between 700 and 970, it says. And you're going to move around the pitch. The heat gun takes a lot longer than the torch does, but you have less chance of burning the pitch. And what happens when you burn the pitch is you burn out some of the other ingredients, like the tallow or the wax or something like that. And then it loses its elasticity and spring. You can also burn out the other elements that cause it to be firm. So you alter the composition of your pitch, and you don't want to do that. Plus, fumes are really not nice. I've got my fan on low so you can hear me. Normally I would have this blasting, but I risk my life for you. So I put my biggest torch tip on because I want a nice brushy flame, and I'm just going to go in here and move this around just like we did with the heat gun. And I just want to be careful not to, if I see any smoking or any bubbling, I need to pull it back. So I just keep moving it all over. You also notice I've got this little metal whoopee underneath here. I also got that at Harbor Freight. I think it's used in the auto industry. It's some kind of mixer. I'll have a link on my site for that. And what will happen is this softens up. Sometimes it slides towards the edge because it self-levels when it gets hot. And that's where this comes in. I scrape it back and mount it up in the center again. You don't have to fill your pitch bowl this much. You can just fill it to the edge, but you don't want it to the pitch deep inside the bowl, because it's really, really difficult to do your work with the, oops, see that was too hot. Did you see that bubbling right there? That's too hot, so you don't want to do that. As my mother used to say, do as I say, not as I do. Okay, so I think that's ready. So at this point, I'm going to take this. I'm going to get my fingers wet, just in case. You don't want to get this pitch covered with water, though, because what can happen is the bubbles can build up underneath, inside the pitch, and then when you heat it, they can blow. So you want to keep away from the image, especially with these damp hands, because you could take off your design because it's water-based, the backing. By the way, you don't have to do this white thing on the back. You can just do it directly on the metal. This just makes it a little easier to see, especially when you're doing intricate designs. So I'm just kind of pushing it down in here so that the metal is completely supported by pitch. And what I'm going to do at this point, since I'm chasing, I want to have the pitch firm underneath. I want it to support the metal really firmly. So I'm going to let this cool down to just a little above room temperature, maybe at room temperature, and then start the chasing. So I can't do anything for probably 15 minutes. So through the magic of video, we'll meet you back here in 15 minutes. So what we're going to do now is hide. No, we're going to finish the commercially made tools that weren't finished for us. And you can either use like a belt sander to do this, or these little sanding discs that you can find on my website under sanding technique sanding. So start with a coarse one. Use these only for steel, by the way. These, keep a little bag where you keep your steel working tools. You don't want to mix them with your silver or your copper. You don't want to have ferrous with non-ferrous metal because you'll mess up your pickle and it can scratch it, all kinds of problems with it. So keep these tools separate. You can also have steel dedicated files. You can file these edges down too. I'm just going to use the sanding disc, which is why I have on goggles and a mask. And I'm just going to take the edges down, the corners and all the sharp areas until I have a nice rounded edge. And we've done sanding videos and stuff like that, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. It's a really kind of simple process, you know. Now the one thing you need to be aware of is if this tool changes color, you've changed the temper on it, and it can become a dangerous tool. It can be brittle. So when you're doing this, don't let this get hot. Keep a little thing of water, especially if you're using a belt sander, because that'll heat up really fast. So this isn't going to heat it up as much using the sanding disc, but I would keep a thing of water nearby, and every once in a while you dip it in, cool it down, and then, of course, I don't have anything to dry it with, and dry it really well. So now get your sanding disc all wet. And especially if you're using your belt sander, you don't want to get electrocuted. So just keep working on the grits. This one, I would go to the medium next, and then I would go up to the fine, and then you can go ahead and polish them, or you can leave them at about 600 grit. You don't have to have a fine polish on the bottom of these things. There's two schools of thoughts on it. You know, some people like to have really shiny tools and think that they move smoother. You can also, the other thought is that the more matte surface helps the tool to stay on the surface of the metal and to kind of grab it a little bit. So, here go my glasses. So, I'm going to go pick up my glasses and get back with you, but that's basically it on the finishing of the store-bought tools. Okay. So here's some different liners that I have. This one I made from a nail set. It's a real small one. This is a commercially made one. They're really thin, small edges. This one would be used for tight corners because it's so teeny. You can take little tiny steps around the corners. This is the one I use most of the time. It's kind of like a medium sized liner, nice thin edge, and slightly rounded on the outside edges so that it doesn't grab. And here's another homemade liner with some kind of weird tool. I don't even know what that was. Then they have these longer liners that are for, like, you know, pretty long running lines. It is a little thicker, but there's I'm trying to hold this so that at least I can still film it. There's like a little wedge shape here, and it's thinner than you think it is. It kind of makes a little more rounded edge because of these outer edges here. And notice this is also rounded on the corners, and these sides and angles are also rounded. Then we have curved liners, and obviously these are used for curves. Like if you have a big circle, you use something like this. I'm trying to turn it so that you can see the slight curve. There are ones with sharper curves and with less curves. You literally can, you know, make your tools for your needs. Here's one I made that has a slightly rounded edge on it. It's a smaller round liner. And then there's this one's also a commercial one, and it's for smaller curves. Once again, slightly rounded on the edges. So there's all different kinds of liners, and mostly there's, you know, different widths and thicknesses and all that. There's liners that make a wider line, and there's liners that make a sharp, tiny line. But what we're concerned with in the first part of this is to do a nice crisp line so we can outline our design. So I'm going to be using probably the medium size one for most of it, and maybe a little bit of the little tiny guy to get around some tight spots. So moving on, I want to talk about using the tool. When you're hitting the metal, I made some fabulous drawings with, there's that word again. When you're using your liner, you want to have it so that the middle part of the tool here and here are on the metal. Here's our little rounded edges I was talking about. So this area here, the shaded area, is what you want in contact. So you're not holding it like this, and you're not holding it like this, or that, or that. You're kind of somewhere about here, so that you get as much contact as you can without the edges digging in. So it's I wouldn't, you know me in math, I don't know what angle that is. It's a little angle. So this would be an example of, over too far one way, and this would be another example of too far that way. What you end up, and you can tell when you're screwing up, aren't we always aware of it? Is you end up with these kind of, if you go too far forward, you end up with these little chicken scratch kind of things that go on. And they look like this. And then sometimes with too far back, you end up with a deep hole back in one end of it, like that. So it'll look almost wedge shaped. And it's not pretty. What you're looking for is this. A nice straight line. I'll have a little close up of a piece of metal with these marks on it so that you can see a visual on metal. So it takes a little practice to get used to the liner. The liner is probably the toughest tool. That and the planishing tools. The repoussé is a little easier because it's round, But these liners are used to shape and form this piece, so we really need to take our time and learn it, and practice is the only way to do it. When the liner moves across the metal, you're hitting the liner, and you're almost kind of pushing the tool along with you. But what happens is, during the hammering process, you end up making this little jackhammer kind of thing. And if you've ever used a jackhammer, it moves on its own volition. So you're kind of just moving along real slowly. We're talking incremental here, little mini steps at a time, which gives you that nice continuous looking line. So I'm going to show you that my pitch is ready, and we can show you how to line in real life on pitch and metal. So the pitch is ready. So am I. Goggle up, got a hammer, goggles, hammer, goggles. So I'm going to start with my medium little liner here, and I'm going to work in the same direction all at once. I'm not going to do a lot of moving. I'm going to go down these lines, do my straight lines, kind of straight lines first. One thing about posture, I normally sit at my corkscrew bench that I found at an antique store in Arizona for $40, which was a score. But you want to try to sit like this. You end up like this, but you want to try to sit like this, and to keep your hands about here so that you're not up here working. It'll cause more stress on you, or too far down. So try to have a nice medium posture. For me, it's a visual thing. It's hard for me to see, so I always end up slumping, and I get really into my work. So once again, do what I say and not what I do. So I'm going to start. I'm not going to do these rounded edges. I'm just going to start on the outer edge here. And if you watch the hammer, it just becomes a rhythm. And I'm not hitting real hard or real soft. It's somewhere in between. And see how slowly we're moving through this? So what I've got here is this little line coming in, and you'll see it better after we take all the schmutz off here. Now for the round, so I would normally go down and do all these lines first because I'm in this direction. So I would just go do 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 do. But I want to speed things up here, so I'm using my little round tool that I made for this area in here, and it works the same way. You're gonna move and hammer at the same, in the almost exact same way that you just did with the other lining tool. So we end up with our little curve there. Now at this point, this little round doodle on the end, I've got this little round doodle here. So I can just go ahead and I'm not gonna move it like that. I just kind of walking it around the curve. So I end up with that little round divot on the end, or where the paint is coming off. This tool could come in handy for doing this edge up here. So like that. And then I can do these lines, these little cross pieces, once again with the round tool. That's the cool thing about making your own tools, is that you can make tools that are very specific to your design. And you'll find as you get into this more that you'll need them. You know, you can't find everything you absolutely want. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else we can talk about on this. For like in these little areas here, I could switch to a smaller liner, but I probably won't. Oh. I'll probably just come in from this side. I know it's hard to see, and just take maybe a little extra time to do it. The thing is about the lining at this point is it doesn't have to be like perfect, because you're going to repoussé it and the lines are going to get pushed up, and then you're going to go back in, and it's a continual give and take on the process, and eventually you end up with a beautiful piece. But it's like most jewelry making, it's not always pretty in the interim. So I hope I covered enough about lining on here. It's really something that you just have to practice. Take your time, check your lines. I would do straight line circles, you know, really just give yourself practice sheets to do it on. So we're going to flip over to the repoussé part and a different pitch so that we can do this, you know, efficiently for you. So we're going to go into repoussé.